where you can take a selfie simultaneously with taking a picture of something else, and it combines the two images, one atop the other. So you got a photo of you taking the picture.
You just made $1 billion.
Animation, who needs it? This is the real work. All right, so I guess we're gonna start up. How you guys doing tonight? Awesome. Thanks for coming out. So, quick introduction of the person who really doesn't matter at this table. My name is TJ Shevlin. I am the former founding manager of the San Diego Comic Art Gallery here in San Diego over in Point Loma. I've done assistant editorial work in comics, freelance work, a little bit of a historian, and honestly, just like everybody else here, giant super fan of all of this stuff going on up here today. We're gonna have some fun talking about animation, how it's evolved from the 70s to the 90s, and let's get to the people who you guys really want to hear from. We'll start to my right. You.
Well, I'm Buzz Dixon, and I've been responsible for a lot of crap. But I also like to think I did a few good ones as well, and the good ones include Transformers, G.I. Joe, and Thundarr the Barbarian, among others.
Hi, my name is Larry Houston, and I work with Buzz on working with him on G.I. Joe, and I also work with the Lewalds here as being the producer director of the X-Men, and other shows like Johnny Quest, Captain Planet, and Fantastic Four. So those are the shows.
I'm Julia Lewald. I got to kick off the 90s as a writer on Disney Afternoon. For those who might have watched Chippendale Rescue Rangers, Darkwing Duck, Hero Way the Food, Goof Troop, all those shows back then. And got to be a writer on X-Men the Animated Series as well, also in the 90s.
And I'm Eric Lewald. I'm editor at Disney. And I started off my career with the brilliant classic Challenge of the GoBots at Hanna-Barbera. And from there, X-Men, Beetlejuice, Exo Squad, a lot of action stuff.
Hi, I'm John Semper. My credits are Scooby-Doo, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Fraggle Rock, Smurfs, good grief, what else? My Little Pony. I don't know. Amazingly, I'm still doing it. You probably know me best for Spider-Man the Animated Series. I was producer. Matt Dunford's favorite series.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I'm going to kick this off by asking each of our panelists up here, what was it that got you into wanting to work in animation? Was there something as a kid that really just made you go, cartoons, this is it, this is where I want to go?
Yeah, I'll start. Sleeping Beauty, Disney. I was at the right age for that movie when it came out. It was widescreen. I think it was the first widescreen animated film. And it just blew me away, especially the end sequence where he fought the dragon. And I just never, the fact that that could come from someone sitting at a drawing table, drawing, and then the next thing you knew, there was this big, magnificent movie on the screen in front of me. That, from the moment I saw that, I knew that I wanted to do cartoons. So that was probably, I don't know, age 6 or something, age 7, something like that. So I'm doing what I always wanted to do.
Well, can't say I've always wanted to do, but I've always loved them. As a kid, the irreverent cartoons grabbed me. The Warner Brothers classic era cartoons, Bullwinkle, early Fleischer cartoons like Popeye and Superman that were so beautiful. But mostly it was the crazy atmosphere and the writing. And I can quote Michael Maltese all day from the Warner's theatrical cartoons, and that's what grabbed me, the irreverence.
I'm going to jump in like John and sort of say that the fact that people wrote these things and people animated these things all across the board. How do you do that? How does that even happen? And came from Texas and came out to Los Angeles as a young enough person, and thought this is where these things happen. I would love to be part of that, and that's kind of how I worked my way through it.
Yeah, for me, getting into animation, the two shows, I had to think about it for a second. When I was in elementary school, the shows that really touched my imagination was way back Astro Boy coming across way back in the 60s, and then Johnny Quest by Doug Lewald. Those two films really touched my imagination for animation and what you can get across, the drama and the excitement. And I remember those two vividly as being touchstones for me wanting to get into animation. I mean, for me, and the other thing for me would be like, it's the comic books. You know, I read comic books all the time. You know, it was like Jack Kirby and it was some of the Donald Ducks and stuff, Gold-Key comics and stuff like that. It was a variety of things. But those two, Astro Boy and Johnny Quest, that's what caught me into animation.
Oh, as a kid, I was watching Popeye and Betty Boop, so the Fleischer imagination kind of sunk in deep with me as a kid. And I was a Duck fan growing up, Donald Duck, Scrooge McDuck, even Daffy Duck. I was the Daffy Duck comics. But interestingly enough, the very first comic I bought with my own dime, the first time my father gave me a dime and said, buy what you want here, it was Rip Hunter Time Master, where he's caught between two dinosaurs. And of course, all right, this is it for me. My family moved a lot when I was growing up, and as a result, I got involved deeply in science fiction fandom because your friends in sci-fi fandom at that time were never any further away than the mailbox. So whenever I moved to a new community, the letters were forwarded to me, and I got them, and I stayed plugged in. And the legendary EC bullpen inspired me even as a young kid, because I thought, I always want to do that. I want to be part of something really big, really fun, exciting, work with some cool people, and have people remember it years later. Well, I got it. So.
It is.
So what would you say, for each of you, when you broke into animation, you broke in to this field, when did you feel like you got there? When did you feel like you worked on a project where you could look at it and tell everybody, I'm doing this thing? Like, what's the one that did it for you?
Well, we were just talking about this last night at dinner. It was so easy back in the old days because you knew you had made it, you knew you were in the industry officially if you A, saw your name on TV, and B, if it was on a major network, and there were only 3. And so for you guys today, I don't know how you can define when you've made it, because there's YouTube and this and that and the other. But I knew that I had made it when I saw my name on TV on a Scooby-Doo cartoon, which was my very first cartoon that I wrote. It was called Scoobsy. It was a takeoff on a popular movie of the day called Tootsie with Dustin Hoffman. And I knew that I had made it. I knew, right at that time, that was for Hanna-Barbera, and at that time they were the only game in town, really. If you wanted to officially be in the animation business, if you got something sold through Hanna-Barbera, that was a big deal. And then I subsequently got hired on staff. And then as a showrunner, which is kind of a different level. So there's writing an episode, but then there's actually running a show. And that happened for me with a series called Moon Dreamers, which was part of the My Little Pony show. And it was right smack in the middle, and that was when I was working for Marvel Productions, and that was a big deal, to be running my own show and hiring writers and all that kind of stuff. So those were my 2 milestones.
Well, mine were, as I mentioned before, started with the GoBots. There was a big explosion in the mid-'80s where suddenly people realized they could make 65 episodes of something and syndicate it 5 days a week as opposed to just showing it on Saturday mornings and doing 13 a year. And so a neighbor of mine was working at Hanna-Barbera and said, well, you've been writing for 7 or 8 years and worked in independent films and other things, but what do you think about animation? They need writers. I thought, you mean I can break in without having an agent or do this? Yeah, just come by, give me a sample script to show Gene McCurdy, who's one of the 2 most amazing women in the history of television animation, was the head of Hanna-Barbera at the time. And that got my partner's foot in the door at Hanna-Barbera. They liked the sample, they liked the pitch we made, and we hoped, we could break into this business. And so the partner and I, college buddy named John White, who has about 500 published credits now, we wrote our first script for GoBots. It had lots of red marks on it. Jeff Siegel and Kelly Ward were great to work with. They ended up saying, oh, we like the way you guys write. Can you do another one? And we looked at them and said, we're not really writing partners. Could we each get one? Would that be cool? And they immediately said, well, we don't know if you're both good or one of you's terrible. And the other one made up for it. And we looked at, oh God, we're going to lose our jobs here. And I quickly said, look, you got a deal. If I'm the good one and John sucks, I'll rewrite his for free. And vice versa. And they said, okay. And they gave us 2, and we ended up doing like 6 each. And that was our, we suddenly knew we're part of a series. This is something that's going to be playing 5 days a week. It's going to be playing internationally, and we felt professional.
I found out kind of the same way that Disney TV Animation at the time was starting to get off the ground, and they were open to folks coming in to pitch, and you didn't have to have an agent. It's like, I'm there. And it turned out I was there once a week on Friday, every Friday for the next 6 months, pitching to these dear people, Tad Stones and Bryce Malick, just trying to figure out what it was they wanted, and trying and sort of learning for Chippendales Rescue Rangers. And they gave me one. Finally, 6 months into this, I'd come up with something. They said, okay, give us an outline. Came back with the outline. Oh, okay, fix this, but then come back and okay. Oh, here, try your hand at the script. And at every stage of this on the good old IBM Selectric, because this was so long ago. Yeah. And then turned in the script and took the notes. And key, by the way, if you're a writer, take the notes. Came back and they said, well, okay, we actually have a spare desk open now. Would you be interested in coming on staff? And I said, I don't know about getting it on TV, seeing my name in lights, but just getting that at Disney is like, that's it. I'm done. I'm good enough. This is it for me. And then just doing whatever it took to hang on there long enough was for me that moment.
I was thinking about it as everyone was talking, and I know the first time when I got into the business, my first show that I actually felt I had made it was when I was working on the first G.I. Joe miniseries, and they allowed me to open the show, so I did the opening sequence, the first 15 minutes of the G.I. Joe miniseries, because they basically did, they weren't sure about the G.I. Joe show, so they did these like 5-part miniseries to test the waters before committing to 65. And when I saw my sequence in the beginning, I was like, oh my God, they did it. It's there. And it felt so good to actually see what you had drawn on a sheet of paper and actually see it moving on the screen. Was like, that's when I felt really good about what I was doing. But the other one was actually seeing my name in the credits at the front end instead of the back end of the show. Because on G.I. Joe, I got a chance to write an episode called Hearts and Cannons. So, when it opens up the credits, G.I. Joe, and you see your name, and it's like, oh wow, look, they spelled it right. And from that point, that's when I felt like, man, this is cool. I'm working on shows, getting some credits, and it was later on when I got to direct on, I did Karate Kid, and I got upfront credits, and the other show was Captain Planet. And I got some upfront credits, and I was like, oh, this is cool. I like this. So it was for me, for finding that out that I had made it was at that moment for me. Buzz?
ABC program standards and practices made me their official bad example for 7 years. I was working at Ruby Spears. We had done the first season of Thundarr, and we got it past them because they didn't know what to expect. And after the first season, they knew what to expect, and they told us we're going to cut way back on the violence in the second season. And we all knew if you do that, the show, you know, loses its momentum because it's a violent show. There's no ways around it. So we were trying to decide what are we going to do, and I said, well, the only thing we can do is to write the single most violent season opener we possibly can. Let them trim it back as far as they can, and then whatever is left, you know, we can point to that in the future when they try to censor it and say, well, hey, you let us do this in the season opener. And so Joe Ruby says, well, who's going to write the season opener? And Steve Gerber, who was the story editor, says, Buzz is the only person I know who can write a 45-page fight scene without repeating himself. So it fell upon me, and I wrote Wizard War, which was so violent, even Joe Ruby blanched at it and said, we can't send this in. No, we've got to trim it before it goes to them. And I mean, I'm dropping robots into ducted fans, and there's things flying all over the place. And we send it in, and the network, of course, goes berserk, and they hacked it all up. But the plan worked. It came back at the same level of the first season, so we were able to keep that level for the second season as well. But after that, whenever Programs, Standards and Practices was hiring a new censor, they would hand them a copy of my script, and if they couldn't find 50 things wrong with it, they didn't get the job.
So John and Eric both had mentioned, John had mentioned that there were only 3 networks, and then Eric had mentioned syndication. So I'd like to talk to you guys about the change from animation on network television to syndicated 5 days a week, and obviously going into Saturday mornings and all that. How did you guys feel about the game changing as far as that was going?
Well, work was work.
For sure.
And so suddenly there was a lot more of it. And it actually kind of opened up. I think I got into the business a little before Eric and Julia. And so it was almost like a religious cult where someone had to die before they would let you in, let an in-person. And then when the syndication thing happened, and basically what was happening to a great extent was toy companies were suddenly taking a huge amount of money and investing them in animation to sell a toy. And so you had Hasbro doing a lot of syndicated stuff, and you had Mattel doing a lot of syndicated stuff, and all these strange toys were suddenly being made into cartoon shows. And it just kind of opened it up. You know, suddenly there were a lot more people involved in writing cartoons. At one time, you could count the number of people writing a cartoon on one hand, probably. And suddenly there were more people involved, and I think the industry went through some growing pains. You know, it was an interesting time. It was a tumultuous time, but ultimately, really, what it did was it resulted in more work. You know, I didn't answer your question though in terms of how I got into the business, because this is kind of a funny story. I was at Hanna-Barbera and I was working editorial, and my girlfriend Cynthia Friedlow was upstairs working in the executive offices, working for Margaret Lesh, who was the head of Hanna-Barbera. And Margaret had this interesting quirk, which was that she didn't like firing anybody. So when it came time to downsize up in the executive offices, and animation companies were always expanding and contracting, and you know, I mean, it's seasonal. It was seasonal work, even for staff people. But at some point, they were going to lay Cynthia off, and the way that Margaret would lay you off would be she would make you a writer. So she'd walk up to you and say, okay, now you're a writer. And what that meant was that you were no longer under her purview, you were now under someone else's purview. And you know, and a lot of these people who would get this opportunity couldn't do it, and then someone else would fire them. So Cynthia came home one day and she said, oh, I've got bad news. And I said, what? And I was working as a film editor. I had worked at Hanna-Barbera as a sound editor. And then I had moved over to Universal. I was working on a movie at that time, DC Cab, directed by Joel Schumacher. Yeah. I was working on DC Cab. It's my first movie credit in the business as apprentice editor on DC Cab. So she came home one night and she said, I've got bad news. I said, what? She said, I've been laid off. And I said, really? They laid you off? And she said, well, no, they made me a writer. But I'm not going to do it. And I said, no, do it. I'll do it with you. And because I'd worked at Hanna-Barbera, I'd worked with all the producers. I knew everyone. And I knew that I could write a cartoon, especially the way they were being written back in those days, which wasn't really all that hard. So we started writing as a team, and she would work at H&B during the day and go in and deal with all that. And I was working at Universal during the day, and I would come home at night and I'd do all my handwritten writing, and she would type everything up. And we ended up selling 3 Scoobies that year. And that was a huge success, really, from Hanna-Barbera's standpoint, that we could sell 3 cartoons to ABC at that time. We sort of became the darlings of ABC. And then they said, well, who is this John Semper guy? And she said, well, he used to work down in the basement, in editorial. And they said, well, we got to get him on staff. And that's really how I became a writer. So,
if I may, just one brief little anecdote about the cyclic business, the nature of the business. You would go through the production season, it would end, and then there would be anywhere from a 3 to 4 month period. It was called hiatus, while you were waiting for the networks to start gearing up and start looking at and ordering new shows. And I was at one studio, and I'm not going to embarrass the person that this happened to, but I was at one studio and they announced, okay, we're going on hiatus and we're laying off all the creative people. And then they privately came around to a few of us and said, you're not being laid off, but we're saying that to, soothe ruffled feathers. And one writer came in and says, well, are you going to be hiring again? And they said, well, in April when we staff up, but if you find something between now and then, you take it, because he wasn't that good a writer and they wouldn't miss him. And he said, okay. And so end of November he left, and then April 1st he shows up and just goes to his old office, sits down and says, here I am. And nobody had the nerve to fire him. They just go,
So it is strange to think back when I started in the first of '85, late '84. Hanna-Barbera, Ruby Spears / Kids, they all own each other. They had something like 65% of the Saturday morning market. It was just astounding. And Smurfs ended up being 90 minutes long. They were just selling things like crazy. And the rest, Disney hadn't started, Warner's hadn't started. It was a bunch of little producers, like Filmation and all these other small independents. Mm-hmm. And there used to be a sea of little independents out there that would you maybe hope to get hired by. And they have this pitching season in, say, in February, and there were 3 networks. Fox didn't exist yet, and so these 3. And I always remember there being 3 women: Judy Price and the woman at NBC, the woman at CBS.
Phyllis Tucker Vincent and Jenny Trias.
Jenny Trias, right? So these 3 women decided what got produced on the planet, because this was the center of animated television. There are 3 networks, and all the little producers would come and pitch shows, and Joe Barbera was the king of pitching. He got run up and down and play out the whole thing. So it was in terms of getting to the next stage, the syndication. It was this sudden gift, instead of just like being a migrant farmer where you get maybe hired for a few episodes while things were working, and then just have to look to something else to support yourself during the off months. Suddenly, when you had, instead of just only pitching to these 3 powerful women, you had, we're going to do 65 episodes, and you guys are going to write straight for a year and a half, right, until you drop. It was just, I can make a living at this. The syndication was this gift to the creative people. But I'm sure the same thing for artists, because it's piecework, unless you're on staff, and then if you're on staff, as you said, they let you go every 6 months, and that's not really a commitment.
I'll tell you the thing that really changed before syndication, though. The networks were very limited in their thinking. It was very narrow vision, and the number one thing was that you got all your product from Hanna-Barbera. That was where, as far as the networks were concerned, that was the only place to get product from. And so there was a little bit of product that would be given to Filmation and offshoot studios like Ruby Spears, but keep in mind that Ruby and Spears had created Scooby-Doo and had started at Hanna-Barbera. So everything was Hanna-Barbera. And the head of Hanna-Barbera was Margaret Lesh. So it was sort of like Margaret Lesh was Hanna-Barbera. And then Margaret left. And that really was like the Big Bang, because suddenly the networks were like Nomad in Star Trek. It was sort of like we get all our products from Hanna-Barbera. But Margaret is no longer Hanna-Barbera, but we get all our products. And that shook everything up, because Margaret went over to a company called Marvel Productions, and she took my partner Cynthia and I with her. And everything started fragmenting, and suddenly this strange new concept with the networks, we can get product from other places. And that really sort of predated the syndication explosion, because suddenly now there was Marvel Productions, and then they discovered a few other companies. Andy Hayward created Geek, and oh my goodness, we could get product. Andy used to work with Hanna-Barbera, and suddenly now they could get product from Geek. And that really was the first step in sort of exploding.
There's one key has to be mentioned. In the 1960s, there was a Hot Wheels show, and it got complaints from parents saying it's just a half-hour commercial. And the FCC issued a ruling that you could not have a show based on a toy. You could have the show and then sell toys afterwards, but the show could not be based on a toy. And when the Smurfs came along, they were first introduced as these little tchotchkes and whatnot, and they were insanely popular. They were everywhere. And people said, oh geez, if only we could have turned this into an animated show. And someone said, well, it was a Belgian comic book, And they said, oh really? And so they did the Smurfs at Hanna-Barbera, and when the FCC complained, they said, look, Belgian comic book, And so the FCC goes, oh, okay, all right, it was a pre-existing property. And then the Strawberry Shortcake people started doing their specials. The FCC objected again, and they said, well, before it was a doll, it was a series of greeting cards, and that's printed material, so it's publishing. And they go, yeah, okay. And at that point, Hasbro and Mattel approach Marvel and DC respectively, and they do the Transformers and G.I. Joe comics at Marvel and the He-Man comic at DC Comics. And at that point, the door gets thrown wide open, because they just go, okay, it's pointless to argue anymore. They'll find a way around it, just let them do what they want. And that's what threw the floodgates really open in syndication, because without that, it would have still been a risk. A producer would have had to convince somebody to give them the money to do the show. The toy companies put the shows on with a system called, barter, the barter system. They would tell a local station, we will give you a half hour of animated program. All we ask is that half the commercials be ours, and you can sell the other half to whoever you want. And that's what opened it.
That, by the way, is what made Byron Allen a multimillionaire. He used to do programming in the trash hours of the wee hours of the morning. He would create these sort of talk shows that were made up of mostly clips that he would record of famous actors during their press junkets. And it would be called, The Entertainers with Byron Allen, and it would come on at 3 o'clock in the morning. And he would give it to the stations for free in exchange for advertising time. And then he would sell the advertising time. And Byron Allen just bought the Weather Channel. and he's talking about buying movie studios right now and stuff. I mean, it's made him a multimillionaire, so it's a pretty good system.
Yeah, two things from Buzz's anecdote, just that are kind of startling in retrospect. Here we are in 2018. One of them is that animation is really expensive, and so that the way that we were allowed to produce these shows was that somebody was making money on the merchandise, and that continues to this day. I mean, it's just the money that you get for putting something on television, as much as it is, doesn't cover the hundreds of thousands of dollars per half hour it takes to produce something, all the people, all the hands that it takes. And the other thing is just imagining back to his story about the FCC, which is absolutely true, and which I heard about the time I came in. We're all here seeing that the FCC nodded and respected the fact that something had been a comic book first. It was really odd. I mean, versus a toy. I mean, that makes all the difference. The fact that there's words by it, and it's printed material, or even a gift card. Oh, okay, well that's okay. But a toy is somehow painted because that's commercial.
Which is funny now, I do have to say, because it seems within the last maybe 10 to 15 years in the world of animation, if there isn't a toy line, it makes or breaks the show now. Like there's no way for a show, no matter what the property is, to survive today without a toy line.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say, really quick, the reverse of it, there's a story from X-Men that Will Minio, who's not here, up here with he and Larry are the heart and soul of the art side of the X-Men when we did this. He handled a lot of the politics, and what happens in some of these shows is the toy people are putting up all this money. They decide they want to tell the stories. They want to be creatively in charge, and it's a terrible decision. I mean, we don't tell them how to stock their toys in Walmart. They shouldn't tell us how to write the stories, and the smart ones don't. At a point, while the first season of X-Men, while we were writing the first season, Will got a call from Australian, I believe it was Australian maker of toys for Happy Meals, saying that because Marvel was in tough shape financially, Marvel had sold them the rights to make these Happy Meals toys and told them that they could tell us that they could put them all in the TV show. You know, Wolverine would be sitting there playing with his bobblehead or whatever. And Will said, no, I'm not going to do it. And they said, but Marvel, swore to us as part of our contract. They said, well, we didn't tell them that, they could tell you that. And it went back and forth. And they said, okay, we're going to fire this guy. Will's going to get canned. Baby Gross Studio's going to get canned if they insist on not putting our toys in. And Will got them on the line and had a lot of witnesses there and said, look guys, you ever heard of the FCC? It's a toy thing. If the show will get shut down because of this FCC ruling, and that was the only thing that shut them up. If it weren't for that, we would have had guys driving little toy cars in the X-Men. So the FCC saved our ass.
That's a rare sentence from the sound of that.